There are some horror movies out there which have a reputation. Cannibal Holocaust, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. Those kind of movies you hear get talked about quite a lot, and they have their fans, that they have their detractors. Those are the films which are famous or infamous for a certain amount of nastiness and relentlessness. And the movie I watched tonight, Don't Go in the House, has a similar reputation. It's quite a small-scale movie. It was the director Joseph Allison's first feature film. Don't Go in the House stars Dan Grimaldi. He later went on to appear in The Sopranos. Besides Dan Grimaldi, I don't really know anybody in the cast. It's a pretty compact story. Interestingly, Don't Go in the House is built around a very strong premise, and it manages to sustain a great deal of dread and anticipation of something horrible to come without showing too much, without being too graphic. Don't Go in the House is one of these movies, I remember reading about it in a horror magazine and seeing those photos and stills of that character with a flamethrower and wearing that fireproof mask and suit. And that's how the film was sold and marketed. And there is one pretty horrific scene where a female victim is chained up, hoisted up in this metal room and pretty much torched alive. And this is what's made Don't Go in the House into this notorious, nasty horror movie. But apart from that scene, Don't Go in the House is a pretty straightforward psychological horror about this damaged person. The plot, the way Don't Go in the House opens is we are with the main character, Don, played by Dan Grimaldi, and he's staring into flames. He's this guy in his early 30s, late 20s, not very bright, obviously, and he seems to be working at this place where they incinerate trash. So there are those rows of huge furnaces, and they're basically burning stuff in there. And we see Don staring into flames, and there are great, beautiful, expressive shots of just coals, glowing coals and ashes, and it looks like he's staring at some kind of a volcano, so there is that kind of rumbling sound of flames, and that's a great way to introduce us to the character. And what happens is there is this inciting incident where one of his co-workers catches fire. There is an accident, and we see this guy go up in flames in the middle of this plant, and Don just stares there transfixed, watches this guy burning and screaming and doesn't do a thing. And this is the way we're kind of put into Don's mind, and we realize the guy isn't quite all right. And as the story unfolds, we follow him around and we see what he's up to and why he is so deranged, because the guy is deranged. Don't Go in the House is an exploration of a childhood trauma. Some of the best independent US horrors from the early 1980s, they go into the childhood trauma thing with various degrees of subtlety, with various degrees of earnestly. Well, Don't Go in the House is one of these. It's grim, it's pretty humorless, but it seems to take itself quite seriously, and especially the performances, starting with Dan Grimaldi, are very earnest, and this helps keep this movie anchored in this grim but realistic ambience. And the locations they use, the movie Don't Go in the House was made around New Jersey, I think, and it looks like the dead of winter, so it's quite barren. They show some very anonymous streets and occasional barren landscapes. We see kind of those bare trees and roundabouts, some highways, bridges, so it's all very anonymous, just some kind of semi-urban environment. And Dan's world is one of the most depressing things about Don't Go in the House is the misery these characters endure. We're like with working class characters who inhabit this incredibly cramped and depressing world. It made me think of movies like Combat Shock as well. It almost seems to have a social dimension, which was not necessarily intentional. From today's perspective, it's a great snapshot of some of realities of the time. I'm not saying they've gone away, but the way they are captured in this film is very straightforward and dead on, which I think a lot of contemporary movies are lacking. And that's an added plus to Don't Go in the House. So the story is Don's trauma is his mother used to abuse him as a child, and he grew up into a pyromaniac because she used to hurt him by holding him over this lit flames in the kitchen. So he obviously developed a huge trauma, and Dan Grimaldi's performance as Don really makes us get involved in this fairly simple story, and the way he reacts to his mother's death, which happens within the first few minutes of the film, it's really powerful, and it sets up the further development of his psychosis, which goes a bit along the lines of Hitchcock's Psycho, but it takes its own weird direction. There is more flamethrower action, but it's mainly off-screen. There are some very odd confrontations. It's a strange film, and it's pretty uncomfortable and quite special. I can't think of another film which explores these themes with the same amount of seriousness, but without being dull or without being too ugly. There are many more similar movies about trauma which are just nihilistic as hell and completely worthless, have no artistic merit and no story, they just focus on suffering and misery, and those I don't even want to bring up. So Don't Go in the House is a great, I think it's an outlier because this infamous flamethrower burning scene helped sell the movie to many markets, and this is why we're still talking about it today. But that's not what gives the film its power, really, because most of the violence is psychological and it's achieved through good storytelling and acting, and we don't have to see too much. So it's one of these films that less is more works, but there is stuff up front on the screen. So it's not one of those completely chaste movies where you don't see any blood or nudity or anything at all. So it has that very good balance between being dead earnest and still being a great horror film. There is that house, which must have been a condemned house at the time, and again it's echoes of Psycho, but like in the 1980s. It's this huge kind of gothic mansion where you can tell it's a place where something evil dwells, so I really like the shots inside that beautiful, historic, dilapidated house. And some of my favorite shots in the movie were just very simple close-ups of this large box of matches, which is, the camera just sits very still and stares at this box of matches on the in the kitchen there. Nothing special, but the way it's also accompanied with this appropriate sound effects, and the way it's embedded into the story, it signifies something. It tells us something about the character and his obsessions, and that makes it just gold. And that's where the director Joseph Allison shows his brilliance. He allows the camera to just linger on that matchbox, and it helps us again come closer to understanding the character. A lot of slasher movies and films about psychos and disturbed people and murderers, they lack insight to characters' actions, and they just document some of their behavior without really any opportunity for the viewer to be anything but just a completely uninvolved bystander. So those films wear you out very quickly, whereas with Don't Go in the House, the character is definitely sick and deranged, but we are allowed to comprehend the drive, what compels him to commit these atrocities, and that's a lot. I don't think Don't Go in the House is that sort of film you would watch every weekend for fun. Some horror movies, you can watch them quite often, some of the more superficial ones, because they don't really involve you as deeply, where it's more about chuckles and just the absurdity of it all. Then you can sort of come back to them and revisit them often because, they're not as taxing. Whereas a film like Don't Go in the House, it actually takes you all the way down there in that nasty place. So I think it's a film where you can, if you have it in your collection, it's probably going to be the one you're not going to reach for all that often, but it is definitely a worthy film. And let me also mention Richard Einhorn's soundtrack. It's the same composer who provided the score to Shockwaves, which was a brilliant underwater Nazi zombie film with Peter Cushing. So there are a lot of very appropriate electronic noises and sound effects which really underscore this deranged, growing kind of hysteria which is always simmering in Don't Go in the House. And another shot that really stuck with me is throughout the films we see Don pick up hitchhikers, or he somehow has to get his victims, which are girls, into his creepy house, right? So he finds stupid ways which are not always convincing. The story isn't always 100% well thought out, so that some of the victims do appear to be a bit too trusting, and it kind of undermines the film's believability a little bit. But nevertheless, we do realize, okay, he had to get the victims to his house somehow, so it's pretty easy to overlook those slight storytelling problems. And we see a lot of shots of Don at the wheel of his van, and Dan Grimaldi just looks so creepy in those shots every time. It's just, whenever he's behind the wheel, I don't know what it is, he looks more menacing driving his van than he's brandishing a flamethrower. It's just acting, isn't it? Also his body language, when you see him walk into this supermarket, he just seems very kind of wooden and cramped, and it's just, Dan Grimaldi clearly did his homework on the character and didn't shy away from it's actually like a bit of a tragic figure as well, but within the realm of an exploitation movie. So those shots of Dan Grimaldi at the wheel of his van really stuck with me. So Don't Go in the House deserves its reputation as a grim and nasty film. It's not too graphic, but it does sustain a very grim atmosphere due to a very good central performance from Dan Grimaldi, which pulls everything together. There is a simple but well-told story. There is a certain dramatic arc to the proceedings, and horror elements come at regular intervals. It's not the goriest film out there, but there are enough events in this film to sustain your attention throughout the film's fairly short running time. It's a low-budget movie, but effects work is very decent. What few effects there are hold up pretty well. For an early 1980s film, Don't Go in the House is shot in a simplistic way, but every shot is to the point, and it contributes to bringing the story forward, which is quite rare in low-budget horror films, which have a tendency to just dwell on violence or gore or include a lot of padding. Don't Go in the House doesn't have those problems. It could have done with a bit more humor, but there was at least one scene which I found kind of funny, even though it may not have been intentional. So after Don's mom dies, at first he's completely devastated, and we already know that the guy is deranged. So now he's alone in this huge empty house with his mother's corpse. And what does he do? He reflects for a second, and obviously he's grief-stricken. He was obviously very attached, but he has a very mixed feelings about his mom, who used to hurt him physically and abuse him. So a part of him is liberated, and he has this voice, and he realizes, okay, I'm pretty much on my own. I can do as I please now. So it reminded me of Home Alone, when Kevin sort of jumps around the house and realizes, okay, everyone's gone. He can do what he likes, make a mess, and there's nobody there to control him. And that's what happens with this guy, except he's like around 30 years old, and what he does is he runs to his record player, he puts on this disco record, he starts jumping up and down on a chair, bopping around the house. So it was it was both disturbing and pretty brilliant, actually. And for a moment you saw that the repressed kid was still in there, and I found that a really nice, revealing thing, which again tells us a little bit about the character and also breaks up the film's grim, one-note ambience a little bit very nicely. So I like that. So if you like hard-hitting, relentless, grim horror movies such as Maniac or Combat Shock, then you might as well try out Don't Go in the House in case you haven't already. There is a good chance you will find somewhere there for you to enjoy. It's a movie that does not stay its welcome. I'm glad I checked Don't Go in the House out. It's a decent film.